Hey, Stronghold crew. We'll get started with episode 24 soon, but I wanted to set up the next two episodes that will start season 2 of the Stronghold podcast. This week, I welcome back my first two-time guest, Jen Becker. Jenny joined the Stronghold as my first guest back in episode 3. That's called Servant's Heart. And if you'd like to catch up with her background, find out more about her, it's one of my favorites. So go ahead and check that out. But this week in episode 24, Jenny brings her expertise on identity. So identity and where we draw it from, I believe, determines the entire course of our lives. This week, we start to introduce identity and reintroduce Jen to the Stronghold in episode 24. In 1 week from now, in episode 25, Identity Part 2, we'll go through an exercise called the Conflict Map. And if you're looking for vulnerability, buckle up, because I really put myself on the spot and run through this conflict map exercise as the subject. Jenny does an amazing job and is one of the most impactful experiences I've had in my life. I hope you enjoy it as a listener. But with that out of the way and the setup of the next 2 weeks on the Stronghold podcast, I ask that you enjoy episode 24, Identity, with Jenny Becker. All right, welcome back to the Stronghold podcast, where we explore capability and truth. I'm your host, Dave Martin, and today we welcome back our first two-time guest.
First two-time guest. Let's go.
So, Jenny Becker, welcome back.
Thank
to
you.
the Stronghold. First time I get to say that, and I'm really glad that I am saying that to you. So episode 24 today also kicks off season 2.
24.
Yeah, 24. Someone asked me where I was at today. And, when you say it out loud, it's one of those things. If you say it to yourself, it's like, oh, it's just 24.
Yeah.
But it's 24 straight weeks that the Lord's put something on my heart and I'm getting on a message.
That's
and it's been
cool.
Yeah, it's been all over the board.
Yeah.
So it's been a blast. And so today kicks off season 2. And I think that when you hear the topic, which is going to be identity, I kind of understand why this season got bookmarked as the beginning. Because this is going to be something that the Stronghold podcast and those around me will definitely hear, feel, and see in me, and your mission, Jenny, is a big part of that. I usually do an introduction of the guest, but before we sat down today with a return guest, if you want to know more about Jenny Becker, if you go back to episode 3, so I think we were talking, and that was October. So it time flies by, and so episode 3, Servant's Heart, is with Jenny Becker. So if you want to know her background and introduction, go check that one out. And if you haven't listened to that one's a great one to catch.
It's a super fun conversation. Yeah,
it was. I was worried. I joked that when I got home, I listened to the podcast back in editing, and my wife listens right with me, and she said, "Well, you pretty much don't need to have guests anymore because because Jenny broke the mold." And I was actually worried. And since then, as I covered in last week's podcast, just been blessed to hear so many human stories and where people are at. And while yours was certainly a great way to start and a great story and impactful, and we'll carry that on today. Everyone has that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. It's in all of us.
Yeah. And I know I've been talking to friends lately that like Jordan Peterson talks about, one of the greatest dynamics that two human beings can have is to enter into a genuine conversation where neither has like an objective.
Yep.
It's trying to steer the other towards their viewpoint, where they just enter it for like just organic conversation.
Yep. It's rare though. It's rare to find that.
It is. It is. And so that's what this has been. I am putting a shoe on the other foot today. In that I usually mention to guests, just show up, and it's to be an organic conversation. I'm kind of giving you the reins today, so I have to take my own advice, and today it's going to be you really taking the steering wheel. You do work around identity through an organization called Identity Exchange, which I have looked a little, but I purposely kind of held back, because I want this to be as genuine of an experience, and you're going to you're going to be walking me through that today.
Yeah.
And in one of the exercises that you do with identity exchange. And so I know you're busy. It is hopefully springtime here in Minnesota. So we have all have things to get to.
Absolutely.
But with that, anything that I missed there in setting up, or do you want to jump right in?
I think, like you said, it's been fun to just be your friend and watch the podcast unfold. Like, I love just like, oh, they've interviewed this person. Oh, I know that person. I don't know that person. It's just been really fun to just, like you said, and just to hear as you're doing this, like the organic conversations that are just coming out of being. And I think that's something that I love, actually. It's actually telling of someone's identity, how when other people are around them, that they feel free to share to that level.
Yeah.
That says something about the way that God uniquely created you. And so I just think it's really fun to watch. Like, the thing I love maybe most of identity is that it's not something that we have to do. It's just something that we are. It's just, the doing is actually just being. And then it just flows from there. And so it's been really fun to just watch, even in the last, I think it's amazing. It's 24 episodes already. To just watch that. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk with you about it. Like you said, I work for Identity Exchange. And so I coach for them. So I get to work with people all over the country right now. And I do, so the people that I'm working with right now are in an intensive. So it's like a 12-week intensive. I meet with them 4 times over that 12 weeks and really just kind of process what they're learning and do, like these listening prayer exercises. And I'm never, ever, ever like expecting what comes out of that. I think I go into it with some level of like, oh, I have a feeling that God's probably going to say, do something. And then by the time I'm done, I'm like, I can't believe that just happened. And so it's just really fun to see how God is not afraid to like meet each of his kids in a unique way that makes most sense to them. And that's something that I was thinking about, and just wanting to even ask you kind of your perspective, because the last time we met, you were sharing, you had been on like a men's retreat and you had like heard some things from the Lord and we're like kind of like sorting that out. Like, what does this actually mean? And so it was really fun to just even hear your thoughts on that. And a conversation that continues to come up lately in identity exchange and just in the circles that I seem to be talking to people a lot in is like, we can really view Jesus in one of 2 ways. He can either be viewed as a means to an end, like he's the path to heaven or something, or we can view him as a paradigm, other name for paradigms like example, for how we're actually going to like operate in the world. And so it's interesting to hear, even like hearing one of your identities, one of the things you shared last time was like, king was one of the words that you heard. And so it's amazing to me to think then, as with an identity like something related to king, that your paradigm for Jesus is going to be a picture of a perfect king that rules in a way that a perfect king would rule, right? David, for example, in Psalm 23 is talking about a shepherd. He's talking about the good shepherd and referring to God as the good shepherd. Well, one of David's identities is he's a shepherd. And so his paradigm for who God is the perfect shepherd that leads him to the perfect patch of grass in the desert and brings him near the perfect water that's filling and that's cleansing and healing and nourishing the trees and the grass and all that stuff that actually leads him into the dark places that he's afraid of going, and in the presence of his enemies helps him sit and be there with them, And so it's something that I've been thinking about lately a lot and talking to people a lot is like our perception of who God is we say, like, especially in Christian circles, we say like, I have a personal relationship with God. But then when I ask people oftentimes where God is, it's like, he's like this high and lifted up, like holy, which is true. And yet he's also a personal God who's actually here with us right now, who actually wants to talk and engage in a personal friendship, parent relationship with us, And so the paradigm piece is really important because I think so often our paradigm of who God is skewed. Like we have a different idea of who he actually is. And so it's fun to learn identity because not only does it help us to understand us, but it actually helps us to more accurately understand him. That if he created me in his image and his likeness, that I am just one facet of who he actually is. And now I can actually know him in a way that I didn't actually know before, So I think it's super cool. I'm just curious what's coming to mind as I'm saying that.
Yeah, so I think when you said, that we can look at God as a path to heaven or kind of a means to an end,
Yep.
and keep him in an exalted nature.
Yep.
That he's far away, and if we play our cards right, and if we're the right kind of human being and fix ourselves, because often with our identity, we're broken or we're
Yep.
less than or we're not enough, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yep.
It feels kind of like a game or a way you kind of have to navigate versus a way that you're guided,
Yep.
which is the second part. And we've been talking a lot in our men's coffee group of looking at God as a father.
Mm-hmm.
And in a room full of men at men's coffee that have raised children or are in different seasons of that, or have been uncles or care providers for their family. When you look at God as the father and you've been a father, it gives a deeper appreciation for exactly what that relationship looks like. That it's not distant. As a father, you're always right there, and you want your children to come to you. You want your children to come to you when they're excited about life, preferably before they're disappointed with or hurt from life, and to seek counsel and to seek guidance and just be in conversation. And I've been pretty genuine in sharing that. It also entails, what do you get as a parent? A lot of times you get a lot of blowback from your children.
Absolutely.
It might be that they're not satisfied with life, satisfied with timing. They don't understand why you're making a decision that steers their life one way when they're with certainty supposed to go the other direction and have a better view and a clearer view, and discount you as a parent. But you have that conversation, and then that conversation settles down. And what you said, is to me a guide, or really the significance of Jesus was to break apart from the law, and bring God to close proximity, to be relationship incarnate. And so one thing with all these conversations I've talked to people is that I always feel like it's I set up these mics, really don't know where the conversation's going. The conversation's had, and I really the whole time it felt like it's that individual sharing their story, revealing a little bit about what God is really working on in their lives, whether they even think about it as God working or not, but sharing their lives, because God is life.
Yes.
He gives us life. He is within us. And so when that comes out, wherever they're at in their walk with God, it's just so sincere. And it's relationship. And I feel blessed to be part of that. So that's what I was thinking about when you were talking, and wherever I see it, I guess, in life now, where people are trying to make God seem distant or make God seem as exalted, and the behavior has to be right to have a relationship with him. I'm not timid in speaking up, because it is an image of a father. It is an image of a mother. You want so much for that child, and often you have a larger view because you've lived more life. It imitates that. And obviously, I think trying to reflect God and be close to him as a parent helps clarify how you're leading your children, how you're leading your community. And so you have work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of our work is actually learning how to humble ourselves to learn from our kids. Like, I think that's something that has really come to light for me in the last year, especially as my kids are moving into young adulthood. It's like, realizing that they're my kids, and just like me, they have a unique identity. They're actually a chip off the old block too. From a father, like a heavenly father sense, like God actually created them with a unique identity too. And there's something that they have that's actually a gift to the world that I don't get to set for them. I don't get to determine. I don't get to say, like, this is who you're going to be, and now my rules are meant to support who I say you're going to be. It's actually coming into alignment with what he says about them, and then empowering them to be fully that, like, all the way. That's my job as a mom. And so much of it, it's like, humbling myself to, like, gosh, I actually need to learn from you. And I think that's really what Jesus is saying when he's like, unless you become like these little kids, you're not going to inherit the kingdom. Like, I actually think he's calling us back to, like, being closer to our 3-year-old selves before the world took over and got involved in our understanding of the world. Like, 3-year-olds aren't afraid of much, like Jamie would say that, and, that's research says that we're only born with 2 fears. Fear of loud noises, which is just a protective mechanism. Something's coming to crush me, and the fear of falling, because there's potential damage to our internal organs. Everything else is a learned fear, which I think is wild. And so even thinking about God saying, like, unless you become like a little kid, really part of what he's saying is like, unless you can get back to a place of like unlearning fear, which recently it came to light through a friend who's or I guess a colleague more, who's a neuroscience geek, was saying you can't actually unlearn things. You can only reform pathways, which I think is a cool actually distinction, that it's almost like an opportunity to form a new groove. Like a friend actually brought up the analogy of a record the other day.
Yep.
Like a record is playing songs. So it's like to form a new groove of like, why am I actually afraid of that?
Yeah.
Like a little kid is not afraid of like what somebody's going to think of what they just said.
Yeah.
They're not. In fact, they say the most crazy things in the world and they're unconcerned about it. Us as parents are like, oh, you can't say that, which is like part of it is teaching kids how to appropriate, be appropriate. But also it's like, man, it's like we get to actually learn from them. Like, how do you see this? What do you think about that? What would you do if you were me? And actually humble ourselves to like trusting that God actually that is an identity, a fully formed identity.
Yes.
Before I even got involved as the mom. My kids were formed before they were even in my womb. He thought them up. And so it's like realizing that it's like, man, I actually get to learn from you.
Yeah. And I've really seen that lately. And unfortunately, when I'm starting to see it, my sons are 20 and 20.
Yeah. Yep.
And you talk about, that kind of learned or the fears or identity, some people call them programs.
Yeah.
And that can be the public school program.
Yep.
Is there some benefit? You get some education and you go through it and you kind of, you get in line to go to college and more programming and then you get a career and more programming.
Yep.
And it's a track and it can be, it's certainly beneficial. I mean, obviously people do great things
for sure.
Track.
Yep.
And it's not that it's bad. But as a parent, what I've realized is it's called sometimes like keeping up with the Joneses.
Oh yeah.
And so we see, well, Joey over here did this. And so my sons are going to kind of follow along that track because that seemed to work out pretty well.
For sure.
And to be the programmers as parents, kind of where you see some of those go and the limitations. And like you said, going from that childlike innocence and childlike faith
and joy.
Yeah. How we started off,
Yep.
And before we prayed, before the podcast I kicked off, that those lenses that we start to see life through that are not necessarily always of God or used by God. They can be used by God, just like public education, and people can come into faith and see their Creator through that course.
Yep.
So it is not throw it all out and start over, but it is programs, and it can be distortions of what God's intentions for our life are.
Absolutely.
And when you see that as parents that you've done that, so if there's young parents listening, what Jenny's saying, when you maybe it's your kid isn't doing something exactly the way you want on that Saturday morning when you're finally starting to get a little rest from the work week, and you just want your kid to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe take a step back and just evaluate, like, why are they going about that? Why is that a really good idea? And if it's not going to cost you capital by going with their plan, then maybe let them run with that a little bit, see where it goes, and be creative and keep that innocence. And
today we'll actually even just walk through. I mean, that's one of the processes that I walk through with people a lot is Identity Exchange calls it the conflict map. And it's really just kind of identifying a situation in my life that maybe feels like it's lacking peace, like it's burdensome, or the other word I like to use is like chaotic, but in a bad way. Like where it's like even just thinking, and there's honestly like, this is a practice that I do every single morning when I'm brushing my teeth. Because I think I can look at every day on my calendar and there's at least one or two things that I know I need to do that are like, either they produce some level of anxiety, some level of dread, some level of fear, something that I'm like, oh, if I had to pick a least favorite part of my day, this is what it's going to be, usually it emerges pretty quick, especially when you're looking for it, and so it's really like identifying like, what is that? How do I feel about it? And we'll kind of go through this process together. But I really think knowing, and to go back to like the idea of how personal God is, knowing that God is actually in the room with you, like in that time when my kid is acting up, my kid is chucking stuff or whatever, it's like, what if God is actually in the room with me and I actually have a personal relationship with him and I can actually ask him like what's going on? And to your point, I love the language that you used about lenses, because it's really, that's something that I see in myself every single day, lenses that I'm wearing that I'm not even aware that I'm wearing. I mean, that is a huge part of identity work, is realizing like we are all wearing lenses. And sometimes it is from like systems of like you said, something that happened in school, something that happened on a sports team, something, whatever. But oftentimes in my own experience, and then in the experience of the people that I'm walking with right now, it's like so often it's this event that seems so little that you would think like, oh, that's not still affecting, you know? I was just talking to a gal earlier this week that she was on a camping trip with her family when she was like 10. And her brother, her mom and dad trusted her and her brother, who was older than her, to go out and like explore. And the brother, they didn't realize that they were sitting up kind of on this edge somewhere, and the brother ends up slipping off the edge and hurting himself. And she can't get to where he is. And so she has to run back to the campsite and get the parents. Like, he fell off. I don't know if he's okay or not. I couldn't see him because he fell down this ledge thing. And so the parents come running back, and she is this little kid, you know, and she's 11, but still, that's a little kid. And she's running back, and her parents are out in front of her. And she's scared to death, thinking like, what if my brother decided my watch? Kind of, that's what's going on in her, even though it wasn't like a deathly fall in her mind. Like, what if my brother was something like my brother, and I was supposed to be responsible, even though he's older than me? And in a moment, the mom turned around and said, what about her? And she just has this picture of herself on this dirt road. What about her? And the dad says, she'll be okay. And then they move forward and pursue the brother. And in that moment, she remembers just feeling like, okay, I have to always be okay. Like, from here on out, I will make sure that I'm always okay.
Yeah.
And that because it was so painful, because she wasn't okay.
Yep.
But then realizing that one little thing that we would be like, oh, it happened when I was 10. It was fine. Like, my brother was fine. He didn't die. You know, I was okay, you know, but the reality of it is, in the moment, she needed someone to like comfort her, to come to her, to explain to her, like, it's okay. You're okay. You didn't do anything wrong. You were not responsible for this. And the parents weren't intentionally being like, you're fine. You know, it's like, it's just in the moment, you know? And so, one, I want to let parents off the hook from thinking that somehow you could even potentially think that you could get this parenting thing perfect. Can we just pop that bubble? Like, let's just pop the bubble that you think, if you think it's possible. I'm sorry to pop your bubble, but it's not. You're a human raising a human. You are going to mess this up.
Yeah.
But it's been so beautiful to even walk through that with her and realize that was the source, how for her whole life, now she's in her 60s, has felt unseen.
Yeah.
And she's done all of this accomplishing. She's a super intelligent, super educated, PhD level human, and feels unseen. Realizing now that she's been collecting all of this information because she wants to be seen.
Yeah.
And she doesn't ever want somebody to come to her and ask her a question that she doesn't have something to offer them, because now I could be rejected for not having something that you needed, right? I need to be seen. And so it's really powerful when we start to realize these little things that we think are so small are actually still affecting us, because of the lenses at which I'm viewing everything in my life.
Yeah.
She's been walking around since age 11 believing I will be okay. You will never see that I'm in pain. That's how she's seeing her whole life. I could never be in pain, right? And so when we think about all of those little things, it reminds me of Acts chapter 9. And it's the story of Saul on the road to Damascus, and he's on this mission. His lenses said something like, it's my job to defend God's honor. These Christians, because I mean, what he was doing was like trying to go out and find all the Christians to kill him for the sake of being Christian. Like, you can't worship God that way. Yeah. I will defend God's honor. I will make you pay for doing it wrong. He had this like self-righteousness, all of this fear around that, this pride, right? And he's viewing the whole world, every situation through those lenses, until he's on his way, which I even think that story is wild, because he actually even just goes to the priest and gets permission. Like, priests give him addresses. Like, yeah, you probably need to do this. What I think is like, okay, even more telling of the people who are influencing us in the lenses that they're viewing the world through, that they would give permission for that. It's like, okay, this is a generational issue that we actually get to do something about. And so Saul gets permission. He's on the road to Damascus. He's got a list of people and a tribe of people that are going to help him carry this mission out to kill the Christians and humiliate them and lock them up. And then Jesus blinds him on the road to Damascus, like literally a bright light from heaven. He's blinded. He can't see anything. He like, what's going on? And then Jesus is like, yo, what are you doing? Why are you persecuting these people? The people that you're persecuting are my people. What are you doing? Right? And so he's blind. the Bible says for a couple of days, and he's scared. He doesn't know what's happening, right? And then this is so wild to me. And then the neighbor guy, Ananias, he's up the street, and the story picks up, and God is talking to Ananias, and he says, Ananias, there's a guy, his name is Saul. He's up the street from you. He's praying to me right now. Here's the address where God gives an address, which I think is wild. Like, he gives a physical address. He lives on, I think it's Straight Street or something like that, which I'm like, what?
Right.
Like, he lives on Straight Street. I want you to go to his house. And Ananias is like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Not going to that man's house. Have you heard about his reputation?
Yeah.
God? And God's like, yeah, I actually have. And I'm actually going to use it. He's actually going to be the cornerstone he's going to be the guy that's going to help us reach the Gentiles. And he's going to change the world, is basically what God says. And Ananias is like, okay, I believe that you're God. I will do this. But just so you know, if I die, it's on you, And God's like, cool, that's fine. Go do it. And so he's like, I want you to go over there. I want you to pray for him. And I want you to baptize him. And so Ananias works up the courage. And he goes over, and I just picture this, like, knocks on the door, and Saul's blind, and goes in and prays for Saul. And then it says, and this is so profound, it says that when Ananias prays for Saul, that something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he was able to see a reality that he couldn't see before. And I think that is what it is like to live with the lenses of a lie.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at my whole life through the lenses of, like, I am not enough, I'm seeing every single thing through the lens of I'm not enough. Just like Saul was seeing everything through the lens of God's not enough.
Yeah.
And I need to look at, I am responsible for justice. That's a false lens, right?
Yeah.
And so when Ananias prays, and it says something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, I love picturing this idea that God revisioned him. It's like he got a new prescription. He got a new set of lenses at which he gets to view the world through a more accurate lens, fully conscious and aware that Jesus has been the Lord all along. All along, Jesus has been the Lord. It didn't just become like, oh, Jesus became Lord right now. It's like, no. Now I see the reality that's always been there because I got rid of these false lenses that I've been viewing the world. And so that's really what this identity work is all about. It's like, one, let me just come into the understanding of God actually doesn't call me any of the things that I'm believing. He's never said any of those things about me. And am I willing to shed those things? Am I willing to believe that what he says is true about me over everything else? Am I willing to believe that what he says about me is actually the most true thing about me that's ever been?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Yeah. And, as you mentioned that too, I kind of forget Paul's story of, you always hear he persecuted Christians, but the intention behind it was really an identity or a mantle that he was taking up, a responsibility that he was taking up to kind of uphold the Lord. And I read something recently. There's a great account on Instagram. It's Your Soul's Toolbox.
Okay.
It just has like daily stuff that's like so on money. If you're tuned into that. And it says people don't need to be saved or rescued. People need knowledge of their own power and how to access it.
Yeah.
And that right there, no one needed to save or rescue Paul, but you really needed to see who he was through the eyes of God.
Yep.
And you see, that's an extreme example, right? If you went the wrong direction with the identity to the point where you're killing others, and certainly in our world today, that happens.
Absolutely.
And, I have a lot of friends who fought in Iraq and fought in Afghanistan, and where they're at as men right now, many of them, the men that they killed over there, they see them as two things. They see them as fellow warriors because they were willing to step up and fight and put their life on the line for their country and for the men and the women and children of their communities. But they also see them for what they are, and that's other human beings. And so then to look back and know that you took a life, and what drove them there was those programs. And you had mentioned people that were kind of supporting Paul's mission, the priests that were supporting and helping Paul's, rooting out the Christians and putting them to death.
Well, his parents. Paul talks about his story. You remember, like, I can't remember where it is in the Bible, but he's like, I have all of the pedigree that you'd want to be a Christian. I was raised in this home where it was this, I'm in this lineage, and this was a part of my story, and I'm from this family and this family and this family, and it's all religion. It's all. And so he was raised in a family that instilled these values that aren't actually kingdom values. Yeah. They're all based in fear and religiosity. Yeah. That say you have to perform in order to be included. You have to perform in order to belong. And really, that's
really glad that we're starting off with this too. 'Cause I have some of my friends right now that are exploring what it means to relook at their creator.
Yeah.
And have had at a young age, bad experiences with Christianity and the church because of all of that.
Totally.
What's placed on top of just the purity of looking towards our creator and seeking our passions and seeking our values and seeking our identity and then being amongst ourselves and sharing that with each other.
Yeah.
And then everything beyond that. I've been reading a lot of Genesis lately, and you realize because it's like the new house. You move into the new house and there's nothing wrong. It's painted, the appliances are new, you get some new furniture, and it's just so beautiful. And then you live in it, and it gets beat up, and the walls get scraped, and the furniture needs to get thrown out, and the appliances break down.
Yep.
All those things that we as men and women, impact our environment with, bring down. But God's creation was just so magnificent.
Yeah.
I think it's like in verse 26, he finally gets around to creating us.
Yeah.
It's like everything from there was things that we did to kind of interrupt into those lenses or those programs or those beliefs above God. And I think it started very little and then has picked up momentum.
Totally. And the thing something that lately I've been thinking a lot about is in the Genesis thing and what you're talking about is the realization. I think for me, whenever I was informed about sort of like sin and how sin showed up on the scene and separated us from God and all those kinds of things, that's always been the the what's it called? Like the precipice of the story. It's like this is the beginning of the story. Like people were perfect until they sinned, but something that I've been thinking about a lot more lately. I'm reading this book. I can't remember the title right now, but this is what it's all about. It's actually talking about how before sin happened, we were actually blessed, which in Scripture, God's blessing is irrevocable.
Right.
Like that's significant. And so the precipice or the crux or the beginning of the story isn't actually then human sinned. It's that he actually created us, called us very good. That word tov in Hebrew, like very good, perfect, lacking nothing. He actually created us perfectly and then blessed it in that form, right? And so oftentimes when we think about the sin, I think I think some of the religiosity has like stirred up this belief system that we just come into the world, broken, sinful human beings into this terrible situation that's a broken, sinful world, which is there brokenness and sin? Yes. Are we broken and sinful? Does God ever call us that? No.
Right.
He doesn't. He doesn't actually call us that. And
not to gloss over that.
That he doesn't ever call us that. He actually calls us tov. He calls us very good, like very good. And then he blesses us in that state, right? And so it's like to realize that my foundation is not in sin. My foundation is in blessing. And that my participation in the kingdom is completely different. Because I realized, like, God never wanted to separate from me. In fact, he never has separated from me. Sin doesn't separate me from God. It actually is just sin is the separation.
Yep.
Like, sin is me separating from God, separating from the reality of who I actually am. Like, for me to sin is to not be who I actually am according to God.
Yeah.
Which is to come into alignment with the systems of the world that say you have to be, as a woman, I get that all the time. As a woman, you're supposed to, for me to like disregard what God says about me as a woman for what the world says as a woman, that's sin.
Yeah.
Like to not be who he says that I am.
Well, not only that, you look at that, and you mentioned women. I mean, masculinity is the same thing. You should be this, and this is too much, or this is toxic. It actually takes away from the most empowered women I know are ones that seek their purpose and identity through their creator.
Yes.
And don't let a lot of other norms or societal in the moments get in the way of that.
Men too. Because I feel the same way about guys. Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that.
Yes.
It's like if you want to be a powerful woman, then explore what that means for yourself.
Yes.
And you'll find that there's a lot of men out there who will support you along that path.
Absolutely.
And a lot of women that will support you along that path.
True.
Because when you start to seek it for yourself, you want it for others.
Mm-hmm. And that it won't be afraid. I mean, I think that's a part of sometimes what it is. And it's like, just like any system, any empire system, we're afraid that that's a fear that we're all working in when we live in the empire. We live in the world, right? that somebody might become more powerful than us, and then I would be subject to them.
Yeah.
And so it's actually more convenient to keep somebody in a false identity for my pocketbook sometimes, or it's more convenient to keep someone in a false identity for my promotion that I could potentially have, or my sense of recognition, or my sense of significance, or my sense of value. It's actually easier to keep someone in a false place.
Yeah.
And so in the kingdom, though, I don't want anybody that I'm around to be anything less than what God says that they are, or frankly, more than what God says that they are, because there's that other end of that spectrum too. Like God, what He says about you is the most true thing about you. We don't need to add to that.
Right.
We don't need to add to that.
Both could be inauthentic.
Absolutely, both are, and damaging. Yeah. Like when I'm outside of my identity, I am causing damage, just like Saul.
Yeah.
Saul was causing damage because he was not in a true identity.
Yeah, where I really see that is in, the internet's great because it brings messages and church leaders across the world right to YouTube and, to see, and you have to see that.
Yes.
See, like, there's a beautiful message there.
Absolutely.
There's something else.
Yeah.
Like there's something that they're trying to be or represent
yep.
or build up. And
for whatever reason, it's the little girl on the road saying, no, she's fine. It's those little moments that it's like that we all are walking around. And like we said earlier, and don't even realize that we're believing that stuff. Yeah. We don't even know.
Yeah, I think that's human nature, that we just want to, we want to add or inject like our piece to it. And that I'll go back to relationship is that, when we have those perceptions of ourselves, not being enough. And so we'll jump right into it because we're skirting around, the purpose of identity today. It is, if you go back to relationship in that example of the father, is how many times have we been resentful of our parents or resentful of an individual, or maybe ashamed of ourselves, the way we handle ourselves in a relationship, the way we viewed our behavior was shameful.
Yeah.
And then we close off communications with that other person, that parent, that friend, that coworker. And then something brings us back into a relationship. And we realize all along, we created that they were good. Yeah. They didn't see it, or if they saw it, they were certainly willing to gloss past it because they've experienced life too and they know stuff.
Yes.
And they see us for what we truly are. We're that good friend. We're loyal. Yeah. We're good conversation. We bring value to the team or the family or just the. I love that we do have a foundation and blessing, and they see that when we don't.
Yes. And we even need to be people that are willing to remind each other of that. Like before you get all like busy beating yourself up about the ways that you fell short, it's like, you forgot. Yeah. You forgot that you're blessed. Actually, you forgot, like, you are blessed to be exactly who you are. And I just think so often we're quick to do the opposite. Like, yeah, dude, you suck. Like we're so quick to validate that in other people. But the reality of it is, it's like, before you sucked, you were really great. So let's just go back to that. Like, let's just. Yeah. Like you actually get to change your mind. That's really what repentance is, like allowing your mind to be changed by God.
Well, what changes your mind too? Relationship, discussion, conversation, coming, in sincerity, arguments, joy, pain, and I guess this last thing, and we can jump in. The men that I work with now, the biggest thing I get is like, how do you pray to God? Like, how do you talk to God? Mm-hmm. And so I use that image of the father. How do your children end up talking to you?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, sometimes they yell at me. Sometimes they celebrate with me. Sometimes they cry with me. Sometimes they laugh with me. And like, that's it.
Yeah.
Just do that. And you can tell how foreign that is when I describe some of my conversations with God. Mm-hmm. One, I feel like sometimes guys I feel them, and maybe this is me imposing this, but I feel them kind of like, take a step back because I get a little woo-woo with like how God impacts me.
Sure.
He impacts me at a very energetic level. And then I will also share instances where since we talked last time, I've had a couple of bubble ups where I've gotten really mad at God. Mm-hmm. And one of those I did share with you is, got mad, had threw my little tantrum, and then basically from God I heard, "Are you done?" Mm-hmm. Just like the parent. I never. Our kids always ask how our kids are so well behaved. I think it's very young. We'd be at Target and, they'd want a toy in the toy aisle and, no, you're not getting a toy today. And, fall down on the floor and start throwing a tantrum. We'd walk away, like 4 or 5 aisles away. And then also, they wipe the tears off and then they're walking with you again. It's like, are you done?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very vivid in my mind. That's what God was like, are you done?
Yeah.
And so here's why.
Which it makes so much sense too, that that's how he related to you in that moment too, because that's a perfect example of paradigm. Like part of your identity is you are a father. You know what I mean? And so when you think of God as father, you think of this perfect father because he is. And so I just think it's so awesome that he would say that to you. Like, and it's like, no, that the reason why he's communicating that to you is because he knows that that's a part of your identity. He's actually communicating through a lens that makes most sense to you uniquely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just
relation is relatable. That's another thing, pulling God from an exalted position. If in a relationship with him, you truly get it.
Yeah.
You learn how to interact.
Yeah.
Who are your best friends in life?
Yeah.
The ones that you stayed up till 3, 4:30 a.m. in the morning talking to, just talking about life.
Yep.
And practicing that, what an exchange looks like between you two.
Yeah.
And so you end up knowing things, deep things, hurts, truths, embarrassing things, shameful things, joyful things, what really your passions are, so that when your friend talks to you, when I talk to friends on the podcast so far, I've always said there's a moment in the discussion where their passions come alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, right there, right there.
Yeah.
That's because they'll be like, I swear I'm going in life. I just don't know where God's pushing me, or where the inspiration is drawing from, or what I should pursue or chase.
Yep.
But that intonation of knowing them as a friend on another level, I hear it.
Yep.
And then oftentimes, either during the discussion or right after, I'll be like, when we were talking about X and you said this, that's when you came.
I saw your eyes light up.
That's when I heard the true Jen.
Yeah.
That's when I heard God, that childlike excitement about life coming through.
Which is just so cool. And that's really a part what you're describing is like the listening part, which I think that the church has done a really good job in the last, 50 years of teaching us how to talk to God in a way that's more human. Like we don't have to have the right, words in the right order with the right, whatever, you know what I mean? Language with this King James, like whatever. But I think the part that a lot of us missing, myself included in this, is I didn't know that I could actually listen to God and I didn't know that I could ask God questions and then expect to be able to actually hear from him, which I think is a game changer, because in our culture, we love to talk about everything. And most of us, unless you're intentionally practicing, you are not you don't listen. You don't actually have capacity to listen because it's not a practice skill. We actually, in America, we have to try to get a word in edgewise or have a louder voice or have a bigger platform so that we can actually talk more. There's so much emphasis on talk, but it's so often we actually just need to discipline ourselves to learn how to actually listen to him and then learn how to listen to him. I think that's the part that I'm having so much fun with Identity Exchange is one, learning how to listen, and then two, empowering people to learn to listen. Yeah. That's really what it is. And the last thing I'll say, and then we should just get into the spare time. I think something the other day, I was doing a Bible study with some friends, and we were watching a gal kind of share, and she brought up this, I cannot remember the name of what this grid is, but it's really a simple grid. You've seen it in all sorts of different places. It's like a 4-box grid. Yep. And it's me, things I know about myself, and then things other people know about me. Yep. And in the top left quadrant, it's there's things that both I know about me and that other people know about me. If you know me, I love dogs. You know things about me that I know about me. And then there's a box that's things that I know about me that nobody else know, other people don't know about me, right? Yeah. And then there's things about me that other people know about me that I don't know about me. There's things I know about you that you don't know about you, right? Yeah. And then there's the fourth box in the bottom right-hand corner. That's things that I don't know about me and other people don't know about me because only God knows them about me. Right. And so I think that these kinds of conversations actually tap into that fourth box. That's a mystery that I might not have known this about you, and you might not have even known this about you, but because your identity overlaps with mine, God's this combo is going to bring this thing out hey, let it spring forth, which is actually that word spring forth. The Hebrew word for that in the scriptures is surrender. And so just as it happened a couple weeks ago, I thought that surrender was I need to relinquish control of something, whatever. Surrender is actually to the only time that we see that word in scripture in my research so far. If somebody wants to come talk about it with me, I'd love that. But where I've seen it so far is when someone surrenders a sword from the sheath. It's you revealed it. There was this hidden thing and you revealed it. And so to think about surrender in the way of that, a conversation like this is actually a form of surrender, saying, I don't know, there's this hidden thing,
Right.
and you know this hidden thing that I don't know about, that God only knows about. And so in this conversation, it's like this surrender happens, that we like allow truth to spring forth.
Yeah.
And then we allow him to sort of teach us what he wants us to know about that thing. And
Yeah,
it's powerful.
you hear it a lot of different ways, and you hear it from secular podcast. I mean, Joe Rogan says all the time.
Yeah.
You could be a caricature or a false identity of yourself. Anybody can do that for
Totally.
15 minutes of views. But if you sit down with somebody for 3.5 hours, 4 hours, that's the true you themselves.
It's true.
And so I think that the translate how I look at that now is that truth comes out.
Yes.
This podcast is all about exploring capability and truth. Well, where I've seen truth is just in these exchanges. And I love that. I love that you broke out those different ways that we can either know ourselves, others know us, or we don't. Neither of us know about ourselves. It reveals a dynamic human being, because people are so quick to say, I'm broken.
Yeah.
And I just don't fit. Well, give yourself some grace, because you're a dynamic entity.
Yeah.
You are created by a creator that we can only begin to understand. We can certainly appreciate, we can certainly worship, and we can certainly reflect, but his ways are so beyond ours. And so that's where I think grace is so important for our internal relationships with ourselves.
It really is.
Just appreciate how.
Yep.
And that's, again, that quote, they need knowledge of their own power and how to access it.
Yes.
Well, that's right there.
Yep. And by being in a community, you don't get that when you're isolated thinking you don't belong. I mean, that's a perfect strategy of an enemy, is to like make you convinced that you don't belong.
Yeah.
To keep you isolated.
Yeah.
That will nothing shuts us down faster than fear and isolation. Like, that is the fastest way. And so it's like, what if you actually got to be around people that see things about you that you don't even see about you? Like, I remember telling, and I forgot about this, but she was a beauty school student of mine. Back in the day, I was a beauty school teacher. And this girl came through the program. She was super, super, I mean, she just had a really hard life. And in a moment of like, not even thinking, I was just living my life, I just said, I'm going to believe in you until you believe in you. And she told me this that was probably 20 years ago. She told me this like a couple of years ago, like, dude, when you said that to me, I'll never forget what that felt like, to realize that you saw something in me that I didn't see in me. And to realize we actually get to give that away. We actually get to like, no, I see something in you that you might not see in you yet, but I'm going to keep reminding you of the truth.
Yeah.
Just so that because you don't see it doesn't make it not true.
Yeah.
Like, just because you don't feel it yet doesn't make it not true.
To see you, to see the value, to see your own power. So the front end of that quote was actually very, it took a lot of weight off my shoulders, because it says people don't need to be saved or rescued.
Yes.
That means I don't need to save or rescue people.
Yeah, look at power to do that. Yeah.
But you want it.
Yeah, for sure.
I know you've been in situations serving and in front of people that I'm sure you want to save. You want to. It's like
my house. Yeah.
Most human of emotion.
Yep.
To be right in front of somebody in their most desperate times, and thinking something I could do could save or rescue them that day.
Yep.
And then, and maybe it fits that quote too of surrender. It probably is the truest image of that.
And the truth about all of that is really that I do have the ability, maybe in those situations, to relieve a temporary discomfort that might feel like saving.
Yeah.
But actually saving is connecting you with your creator.
Right.
Like, because I don't have the power to actually save you. What I do have the power, though, is to connect you to the one who can.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fine line in that with even just my time in ministry. Because that's the beauty. Like, that's why you get into ministry, because you want to like help people. You want to pull people out of the pit.
Right.
But I think oftentimes in ministry, we get into this belief system that it's actually, I'm saving them unto whatever I think would be best for them.
Yeah.
And in reality, I'm doing you disservice, because now I'm just creating you being dependent on me, which I am an imperfect human. If you're dependent on me, that is a dangerous trap, right?
You know me.
Because I know me. And if I all of a sudden die tomorrow, then what?
Yeah.
Then where are you at? You know what I mean? And so it's like, man, I'm doing you a disservice by creating dependence on me. My job as a believer and a person who loves people is to, yes, I can be the middleman for a very short temporary moment, but ultimately my job is to connect you to the one who knows you, who created you.
Yep.
And allow you, to be connected to yourself.
look where and you very appropriately shared the story of, oh, look where that can go.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure he thought he was doing good.
Yes.
And
Of course he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those pastors that were talking about, the Learjet flying, whatever they're driving, wherever they're living,
Yeah.
pastors,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that they're thinking they're right on track.
Yep.
And yeah. All right.